10 virtues that made Marcus Aurelius the king who was never corrupted. He had everything and chose nothing but virtue. What will you choose? Were you born to rule or to remain a prisoner of your own impulses? That is the question your life will answer. Not by decree, not by destiny, but by decision made every moment in the silence no one sees. You are not on this earth to be entertained, distracted, or coddled. You are here to govern one thing above all, yourself. And no one understood that better than the man who sat atop the Roman Empire and yet refused to sit above the truth. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, philosopher, warrior of restraint. He could have had everything, and yet he gave himself to discipline. He could have drowned in power, and yet he lived in meditation. He stood at the pinnacle of empire, but chose to kneel before virtue. In an age when emperors were worshipped as gods, he reminded the world that the greatest god to fear was within. You see, you don't become incorruptible by hiding from temptation. You become incorruptible by facing it, daily, brutally, and choosing honor over ease, choosing principle over pleasure, choosing the flame of inner order over the chaos of public glory. And that is where your story begins, because this isn't just about Marcus. This is about you, about what you'll do the next time ego whispers, the next time comfort seduces, the next time weakness knocks. Will you crumble, or will you rise like he did? Because Marcus Aurelius was not born to be great. He was forged, not by gold, not by flattery, not by peace, but by fire, and so will you be. Virtue 1, self-mastery. Before you command others, you must learn to command yourself. You're a child, 8 years old, adopted into the highest circles of Roman society. Servants bow, tutors stand at your side. Luxury floods your senses. But inside you know this. Power without mastery is poison, and so you begin to train. Not with swords, but with silence. Not with wine, but with wakefulness. While others indulge, you observe. While others shout, you reflect. You begin the lifelong war that few even recognize, the war against impulse. Every morning, while the city still sleeps, you rise and write. Not for glory, for clarity. You pen your weaknesses, your failures, your angry thoughts. You name your ego. You confess your temptations. You write not for praise, but for purification. Because the man who rules his passions cannot be ruled by others, and that is the first brick of your foundation. You do not belong to the empire. You belong to principle. Virtue 2, stillness amid chaos. The Senate roars, generals scheme, barbarians raid the frontiers, Rome trembles, and yet you walk calmly through the halls of power. Why? Because you know panic is the enemy's ally. Rage is the tyrant's leash. But stillness? Stillness is the mark of one who governs not just a nation, but a soul. In your journal, you remind yourself, be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea still falls around it. Do you understand what this means? It means no matter what storms hit you, grief, betrayal, injustice, failure, you don't flinch, you don't react, you respond, you decide how to move. You move deliberately, calmly, as if the fate of a civilization depends on your breath. Because it does, and in your world, it still does. Virtue 3, humility in greatness. Imagine ruling the known world and still doubting yourself every night. You could have sculpted statues of yourself. You could have declared yourself divine like your predecessors did. But instead, you write words no emperor has dared to admit. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. You are not afraid of death. You are afraid of arrogance. You sleep on a hard bed. You eat simple food. You speak plainly to slaves and senators alike. You do not rise above others. You rise within yourself. Because greatness is not found in the titles shouted by crowds. It is found in the questions whispered in solitude. Am I living rightly? Am I better today than I was yesterday? Did I serve the world or only myself? You ask those questions every day, and so must you. Virtue 4, duty over desire. Do you think it was easy? To lead an empire at war, to bury your wife, to watch your children die one by one, and still rise every day with the weight of the crown pressing on your spine? No, it was not easy. But you never asked for ease. You asked for strength, and duty became your backbone. There were days when you could have fled the palace, days when you longed for the philosophy halls of Athens instead of the endless meetings, betrayals, and crises of Rome. But you stayed, you showed up, you ruled, not because it pleased you, but because it was right. When your co-emperor Lucius was indulgent, You remained steadfast. When generals sought favor, you gave them responsibility. When the plague swept the streets, you stayed in Rome. You chose service over self. So ask yourself, will you do what's required even when it hurts? Even when no one thanks you? Even when your reward is silence? If so, you are walking in his footsteps. Virtue 5, resilience in pain. Your bones ache, your heart grieves, your mind carries the weight of millions, and still you walk through the corridors of power with grace. You are not made of steel, you are made of scars. But those scars don't make you weaker, they make you real. You write, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. That is not denial, that is defiance. You choose what meaning pain will have. You choose how to suffer. You choose not to become bitter. You choose not to lash out. You choose to transform suffering into clarity. You do not pretend to be unbreakable. You simply become unshakable. But how do you become unshakable when everything you love is taken? You don't. You choose to keep standing anyway. Virtue 6, compassion without weakness. Power makes most men cold. It numbs their sense of consequence. It blinds them to the suffering they cause. But you, no matter how high you rose, never let your heart grow hard. You stood before soldiers bloodied from the front lines and listened. You walked through hospitals, saw the plagues toll, and wept with those who wept. You wrote letters of condolence by your own hand, not as ruler, but as a man who understood what it meant to lose. And still, you made hard decisions. You punished betrayal. You crushed rebellion. You showed mercy where it could heal, but firmness where it was just. Compassion is not the absence of force. It is the refusal to let cruelty become habit. You taught this, to love only what happens, what was destined, no greater harmony. But love does not mean surrender. You did not bend to please. You did not yield to popularity. You ruled with empathy, but never with weakness. And that's what you must learn too, because the world doesn't need more tyrants. It needs leaders who feel pain, yet refuse to pass it on. Virtue 7, inner freedom. You were born into a system of chains, expectations, duty, privilege. But you chose to be free, not by fleeing responsibility, but by mastering your response to it. Even as emperor, you knew true power lies in controlling how you think. You did not let fortune sway your soul. You did not let rumors twist your peace. You practiced the one thing no enemy could conquer, detachment. You taught yourself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Your thoughts were not your tyrants. They were your tools. You did not chase applause. You did not drown in regret. You moved with purpose, not because you were certain, but because you were centered. Do you understand what that means? It means you can live in chaos and still carry peace. You can walk through fire and not burn from within. You can hear lies screamed from the crowd and still answer with silence. Because when the soul is free, the world can do nothing to enslave it. Virtue 8, simplicity of life. You could have lived in gold, slept on silk, surrounded yourself with the softest, safest luxuries that Rome could offer. But you didn't, because you knew luxury is a liar. It promises rest but delivers dependence. It promises joy but breeds addiction. You lived simply, not to suffer, but to stay awake. You wore plain robes, ate coarse bread. You wrote not from palaces but from tents on the battlefield. And you warned others, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself and your way of thinking. Your simplicity wasn't poverty. It was protection. You refused to be owned by what you owned. You didn't chase more. You refined less. You kept only what made you stronger, clearer, wiser. That is the way of the king who cannot be bought. The master who walks light, the ruler who rules himself, not with excess, but with essence. Virtue 9, relentless integrity. You could have lied. You could have silenced your critics, rewritten the laws, carved your name into every monument and called it divine. But you didn't. You spoke the truth. Even when it cost you, you admitted your flaws. Even when it made you vulnerable. You corrected yourself, even when no one was watching. Because the crown on your head meant nothing compared to the crown on your character. You once wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. You did not lead with noise. You led by being what others feared they could not be, honest. And that is what made you untouchable. Not your title, not your armies, but your refusal to be less than what your conscience demanded. There were times when your friends disappointed you, when your own son became reckless, when loyalty cracked and betrayal knocked, and still you did not become like them, because a man with no integrity is already conquered. But a man of truth, he outlives empires. Virtue 10. Faith in the greater order. You stood on balconies overlooking the empire, watching the sun rise over cities and rivers and fields you would never set foot in. You commanded armies and saw gods fall, and still you believed in something greater, not in fate as an excuse, but as a compass. You knew the world is chaos, but the soul can bring order. You believed that everything, even the suffering, served a purpose. You didn't wait for divine answers. You became the answer through your life. You wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Every obstacle refined you. Every burden became your teacher. You met the divine, not in temples, but in every moment you resisted temptation, chose virtue, and held the line. And when death came, you did not beg for more time. You whispered the final truth that every soul must hear. Live not as if you had endless years ahead. Death hovers at your elbow. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. You were not born to be perfect. You were born to be principled, to rise in a corrupt world and walk through it unstained, to carry the weight of leadership and never forget the weight of conscience, to suffer deeply and still bless the world with wisdom, to face yourself every day and still choose honor. And so the question is not, what would Marcus Aurelius do? The question is, what will you do now that you know what is possible? Because this is not just a story. It is a challenge, a flame, a mirror, a legacy, and you are the one called to live it.